There are certain people who move through life like they're carefully listening for something most of the world has forgotten. They aren't loud and they rarely rush. Instead, they pay attention to the way shadows slide across a wall at sunset, to the pause someone takes before answering a question, to the fragile details everyone else overlooks. While others sprint through life, these people travel inward. They carry entire universes behind their eyes. They are the thinkers, the deep ones, the ones who don't just exist in the physical world, but live within layers of thought, feeling, and unseen connections. They don't speak first. They observe, examine, and let silence reveal things that noise never could. Some would say they think too much, but to them, thinking isn't optional. It's oxygen. It's how they translate existence, how they filter emotion, how they make sense of a world that often feels too hurried to notice its own meaning. To most people, a tree is simply a tree. A building is just concrete and steel. A moment is just something that passes. But deep thinkers see symbols everywhere. A tree becomes a lesson in growth, resilience, and reaching for light. A building becomes a monument to human ambition and impermanence. A passing moment becomes a mirror, reflecting who they were, who they are, and who they might become. Psychology has a name for this tendency: high introspective processing, a trait, where the mind doesn't merely absorb life, but interrogates it. Researchers link it to increased activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain that lights up during creativity, self-reflection, and imagination. It's like their thoughts are always weaving threads, forming constellations out of experience, meaning out of silence. But this slower, deeper rhythm comes with friction. In a world that rewards fast answers, deep thinkers often wait, thinking through 10 possible meanings before they speak one sentence. By the time they're ready to contribute, the conversation has moved on without them. Others mistake their silence for disinterest. In truth, they're simply precise. They don't talk to fill air. They speak to say something true. They are oceans disguised as ponds, still on the surface, wildly alive beneath. And while they may carry a quiet strength, they also carry a quiet loneliness, because not everyone can hear the world at their frequency. What happens inside the mind of someone who feels everything, questions everything, and notices what others ignore? In the next part, we explore how depth becomes both a gift and a weight. For people who think deeply, life is not simply lived, it is examined. Every choice, every word, every fleeting emotion lingers long after the moment has passed. Where others shrug off uncertainty, deep thinkers trace it like a thread, tugging gently until the truth reveals itself. They don't wonder what happened. They wonder why it mattered, what it meant, and what it says about who they are becoming. To some, this might seem exhausting, and sometimes it is, because the same mind that sees beauty in small things also sees complexity in simple ones. It's like having a microscope in the brain, incredibly useful, yet impossible to switch off. A casual remark can echo for days. A question can turn into a labyrinth. Silence isn't empty. It is full of possibilities to interpret, understand, unravel. This tendency is closely tied to something psychologists call metacognition, not just thinking, but thinking about thought itself. Many people glance at their emotions like strangers passing by. Deep thinkers sit with theirs, studying them like maps. They don't just feel sadness. They trace its origin, examine its message, and wonder what version of themselves it wants to shape. They don't simply desire something, they question the architecture of the desire. Yet, there is a delicate edge here. While their insight runs deep, so can their doubts. When you can see infinite angles to a situation, certainty becomes slippery. Confidence can wobble under the weight of possibility. And when every decision carries layers of meaning, choosing can feel like stepping into fog without a compass. Society often praises clarity and quick answers. Yet the deep thinker rarely has immediate conclusions. They sit inside questions longer than most are comfortable with. They resist surface-level answers because they know reality rarely fits inside neat boxes. And in a world obsessed with speed, people sometimes misunderstand this pause as hesitation, not realizing its precision, not fear. Still, this inner world is not a burden alone. It is also a sanctuary. A deep thinker can turn solitude into reflection, silence into understanding. While others run from stillness, they find life inside it. They notice patterns in behavior, meaning in memory, lessons in pain. They hold empathy not as a soft weakness, but as an inner compass that feels before it judges. And though this way of being makes them sensitive to life's weight, it also gives them the rare ability to find depth where others see nothing at all. But what happens when the world grows loud, and the deep thinker seeks refuge in solitude? Not to escape life, but to understand it? We explore the role of solitude, emotion, and the inner storms that shape them. To the deep thinker, solitude is not emptiness. It is oxygen. It is not isolation, but return. When the world grows too loud, when voices pull in too many directions, they retreat inward, not because they reject others, but because they need space to hear their own mind again. Some people rest by shutting off thought. Deep thinkers rest by letting thought flow freely. Silence is not a void for them. It is a landscape. In a quiet room, a park bench, or a long walk with music whispering through their headphones, their mind becomes a workshop. Emotions unknot. Memories slide into place. Ideas stretch like waking animals. Others may mistake this withdrawal for loneliness. But to deep thinkers, solitude is not punishment. It is sanctuary. It is the language they were born fluent in, even before they learned to speak in the outer world. This internal world is rich, layered, and alive. A single moment in solitude can feel like an entire journey. They replay conversations, not to torture themselves, but to understand them. They rewind experiences, not to cling, but to study their meaning. They can sit still and appear calm, yet inside, thoughts ripple like tides moving under moonlight. Slow, inevitable, powerful. However, introspection has currents. It can soothe, but it can also pull them into depths few others ever swim. A stray memory from years ago resurfaces and suddenly becomes a puzzle. A simple question, why did that matter? Turns into an exploration of identity, intention, past, and future selves. Their mind does not forget easily. It archives emotion like old letters sealed in envelopes, waiting to be opened again. Psychologists call this reflective tendency a form of deep, cognitive rumination, not necessarily anxiety, but intense self-examination. It helps them understand who they are and who they wish to become. And yet, when it tips too far, thoughts turn inward like a spiral, looping through what-ifs and why-didn'ts, searching for closure in places where none exists. Still, most deep thinkers learn to navigate these tides. They journal, create, meditate, or simply sit with their thoughts until clarity rises like sunlight through morning fog. They know that emotions are not storms to outrun, but weather to understand. They treat feelings not as enemies, but as instructors, patient, demanding, honest. They don't fear the inner world, they fear neglecting it. And maybe this is what makes them unique. While so many try to escape themselves, the deep thinker walks directly toward their inner landscape, lantern in hand, curious rather than afraid. Yet even in solitude, the deep mind is not still. Emotions move like hidden rivers. We enter that emotional world, the quiet storms, the unspoken sensitivity, and the paradox of feeling deeply while appearing calm. To the outside world, deep thinkers often seem composed. Steady eyes, soft voice, a calm presence like still water on a windless day. But beneath that surface exists an ocean of feeling. Their emotions rarely explode outward. Instead, they travel inward, unfolding in layers. Where others feel a spark, they feel a constellation, subtle shifts, hidden patterns, echoes of old moments rising to meet the present. Their sensitivity is not fragility. It's awareness, a finely tuned emotional instrument. They sense when someone's smile is forced, when a voice trembles with something unspoken, when silence carries tension instead of peace. Most people hear what is said. Deep thinkers also hear what isn't. This inner sensitivity can be both a gift and a burden. When joy arrives, it is rich and immersive. A moment of beauty can feel sacred. A simple kindness unforgettable. But when pain comes, it settles deep, like rain soaking earth instead of sliding off the surface. They don't brush off hurt easily because they don't experience it shallowly. They absorb emotion, trace it back to its origin, analyze its meaning, and sometimes hold on simply because letting go feels like erasing something important. Psychologists call this emotional depth processing the wiring that lets a mind feel and analyze simultaneously. For many, feelings just happen. For deep thinkers, feelings arrive with narrative, memory, symbolism. They don't just remember what occurred. They remember how it felt, the energy of the room, the emotional temperature of the moment. This heightened sensitivity can make them cautious with their hearts. Trust is not handed out casually. It is earned slowly, like light entering a dense forest. They don't fear emotion. They fear offering it to someone who won't understand it. And because they invest meaning in bonds, even small betrayals bruise deeply. A broken promise to them isn't a minor slip. It becomes a crack in the foundation of truth. Yet their emotional depth also gives them remarkable compassion. They don't categorize people as villains and heroes. They see wounds behind anger, insecurity behind arrogance, longing beneath indifference. They don't justify wrong action, but they understand them. Empathy is not a sentiment. It is a lens. Still, there's a quiet paradox they face, feeling intensely while needing to appear steady. So they often process emotions privately, in late-night thoughts, quiet journaling, or whispered conversations with themselves only they will ever hear. To feel deeply is to carry worlds inside, and not every world can be spoken aloud. But emotion alone doesn't tell their story. Deep thinkers don't just feel life, they interpret it, constantly searching for meaning. Now we enter the philosophical territory. Why they question existence, purpose, and the unseen truths beneath everyday life. For the deep thinker, life is not simply a series of events. It is a riddle, a layered mystery waiting to be understood. Where others accept things as they are, deep thinkers look beneath the surface, hungry for meaning. They ask questions most people rush past. Why are we here? What shapes us? What does it mean to live a good life? These aren't dramatic thoughts for them. They are a natural part of breathing, like the mind's heartbeat. This inner curiosity often leads them into philosophical territory. They ponder time and identity, purpose and fate, memory and morality. Not because they're lost, but because they can't help exploring the architecture of existence. It's a trait psychologists sometimes refer to as existential cognition, the instinct to look beyond the obvious and confront the big questions most avoid. For many, these questions might appear heavy, but to a deep thinker, they feel like truth. A passing moment can trigger a reflection about impermanence. A brief conversation can bloom into a contemplation about human connection. Even a simple sunset becomes a meditation on endings, cycles, beauty, and loss. Their thoughts aren't random. They travel like rivers, branching into patterns, flowing with purpose, eventually meeting a wider ocean of understanding. Of course, thinking in such grand dimensions can feel isolating. When others worry about tomorrow's errands, the deep thinker might be wrestling with the fragility of time or the paradox of wanting and letting go. They don't always voice these thoughts, not because they lack confidence, but because depth can feel like a language not everyone speaks. They learn early that not every question finds company. Yet this depth has another side, creativity. Visionaries, artists, scientists, and philosophers often think this way. They see links others overlook, possibilities invisible to rushing minds. They don't just notice the world, they interpret it. They don't just witness patterns, they feel them. Their ideas are not accidents. They are born from reflection, from a willingness to sit with uncertainty until meaning forms like stars in darkness. Still, the mind that seeks truth also grapples with illusion. If every symbol can be interpreted, if every silence contains meaning, the imagination can sometimes overreach. The same mind that uncovers hidden insights can also invent shadows where none exist. And so the deep thinker learns balance, to question, but also to anchor, to explore, but not drift too far from the shore of reality. Ultimately, their search is not just for answers, but for clarity, a life that feels true, intentional, awake. Their quest isn't to know everything, but to live with awareness, to shape life thoughtfully rather than letting it pass unexamined. But thinking deeply isn't only about philosophy. It also shapes how deep thinkers connect, speak, and understand others. In Part 6, we'll explore their communication style, why they pause, why words matter so much, and how they listen to what others miss. For deep thinkers, language is not just a tool. It's an instrument they tune carefully. Words are bridges, and they do not build them casually. They pause before speaking not out of uncertainty, but out of intention. They want precision, not noise. They want their meaning to land where it belongs, not half-formed, not misunderstood, not wasted on conversations that skim the surface like stones skipping across water. Small talk often drains them because it feels like standing at the edge of an ocean without being allowed to step in. They aren't against light conversations, they simply crave depth beneath them. They are most alive in exchanges where ideas spark, where emotions breathe, where honesty lives. They don't care about talking a lot, they care about talking real. This is why they listen differently. Where many listen to reply, deep thinkers listen to understand. They pay attention to pauses, tone shifts, and the meaning hidden behind what someone didn't say. A sigh can say more than a sentence. A hesitation can reveal a storm. They hear emotion layered inside language. And sometimes they feel it before the speaker even names it. This sensitivity makes them excellent. Confidants, people, instinctively open up to them. There's something about their presence that feels safe and steady, like speaking into a quiet night rather than a crowded room. But this same gift can also feel burdensome. They absorb emotions like paper absorbs ink. They carry stories long after others have spoken them and forgotten. When they finally speak, it is with thoughtfulness, sometimes with poetry, often with a subtle honesty that feels refreshing in a world full of hurried opinions. But not everyone is prepared for sincerity. Some misunderstand their quiet nature as aloofness, their reflection as distance, their silence as disinterest. Deep thinkers rarely interrupt, and in a loud world, the quiet are often overlooked. Yet beneath that quiet is clarity. They don't argue to win. They speak to unveil truth. They don't fight to be right. They seek to understand. And when they do choose their words, they can cut through confusion like a lantern in fog. Soft, steady, revealing. But their greatest challenge in communication isn't speaking, it's feeling when someone isn't listening. When depth meets indifference, their voice folds back into silence. They retreat, not in anger, but in self-preservation. They would rather say nothing than say something that isn't truly heard. Because to a deep thinker, communication isn't about exchanging sentences, it's about exchanging souls, even briefly. But connection isn't only about words. It's about emotion, vulnerability, and who they choose to let in. Deep thinkers often live in layers. What they show to the world is only a fraction of what exists inside. Conversations may seem simple, but beneath each word there is context, memory, emotion, and meaning quietly intertwining. They don't interact only with the present. They interact with every past version of themselves who has felt, questioned, and learned their way to this moment. This inner richness is why nostalgia hits them harder than most. A song isn't just melody, it is a doorway. A scent isn't just fragrance, it's a memory unwound. A familiar place isn't just space, it's a map of moments layered on top of each other. They don't remember life events, they relive them, the colors, the atmosphere, the heartbeat of the moment. Psychologists refer to this as deep episodic recall, where experiences aren't stored as isolated facts, but as emotional universes. And because they carry life so fully, they also feel change more intensely. Time doesn't slip past unnoticed. It presses against them, reminding them how temporary everything is. They notice the subtle shift in someone's energy, the quiet fading of a friendship before it's spoken. The way laughter from a certain chapter of life echoes differently now. Joy and sorrow never arrive alone. They travel braided together, teaching one another. Yet this depth also gives them resilience. Where others crumble under uncertainty, deep thinkers sometimes grow stronger. They understand that life isn't simply lived forward. It is felt forward. Pain isn't just endured. It becomes insight. Setbacks aren't just obstacles. They transform into perspective. They don't rush healing. They study it, honor it, trace its lessons. To them, every challenge contains seeds of expansion. Still, the constant processing can be overwhelming. Sometimes they long to switch off their thoughts, to rest in simplicity, to feel without dissecting. But simplicity never stays simple in a mind wired for meaning. Even peace becomes a question, a concept, a fragile gift they hold cautiously, afraid it might dissolve if examined too closely. And yet, there is beauty in this. Depth is not heaviness. It is richness. It is the ability to taste life fully, to see the threads connecting moments, to understand that presence is more than existing. It is witnessing yourself growing, noticing the invisible shifts others miss. Deep thinkers do not simply walk through life. They inhabit it. They feel its seasons. They absorb its lessons. They recognize that what the world calls overthinking, they call listening to life, to emotion, to the quiet truths beneath noise. Now we'll explore how deep thinkers navigate relationships, why they love intensely, withdraw carefully, and seek connection few truly understand. Ready? Deep thinkers do not approach relationships casually. Not friendships, not romance, not even brief emotional openings. To them, connection is sacred territory. They don't just want someone who understands their words. They long for someone who understands the pauses between them, who can sit in silence without discomfort, who values sincerity more than performance. They do not fall in love. They descend into it thoughtfully, layer by layer, exploring compatibility not only in attraction but in values, dreams, fears, and inner worlds. They examine connection the way others examine logic, carefully, curiously, reverently. And once they choose someone, it is not half-hearted. Their loyalty isn't loud, but it is unwavering, like a quiet promise carved into stone. Yet this depth makes them cautious. Opening up feels like handing someone a map to the most fragile parts of their soul. They don't fear vulnerability itself. They fear sharing it with someone who treats it lightly. They know how rare mutual depth is, and they refuse to offer profound energy to shallow intent. They would rather walk alone than force closeness where truth doesn't live. Their love language often looks subtle from the outside. Quiet attentiveness, remembering small details, thoughtful gestures, questions that see beneath the first answer. They listen when others rush. They protect even when they feel uncertain. They support not by fixing everything, but by understanding the emotional landscape beneath the problem. However, this intensity can make relationships challenging. Not everyone wants to be known so deeply. Some people prefer simple emotions, quick explanations, uncomplicated truths. And deep thinkers sometimes expect others to meet them where they naturally exist, in introspection, in honesty, in emotional precision. When someone responds with indifference or avoidance, it feels like rejection not of their thought, but of their essence. When they get hurt, they rarely lash out. They withdraw, they analyze, they replay moments until they understand what broke and why. Sometimes they forgive too long, hoping depth might grow in places it never will. Other times they leave quietly, when they realize they are pouring meaning into someone who only wanted moments, not a journey. But when they find another deep soul, someone who doesn't fear raw honesty, someone who listens as they do, someone who values presence more than performance, the bond is transformative. Two inner worlds meet, and instead of shrinking, they expand. Love becomes not a distraction from life, but an illumination of it. For a deep thinker, connection is never about possession. It is about recognition. Not "I need you," but "I see you." And in being seen deeply, they finally feel less alone in a world that often moves too quickly. To notice what matters, we'll explore how deep thinkers learn to ground themselves and thrive in a world that doesn't always understand them.